I'd like you to imagine the scene. There's a man sobbing his heart out. His eyes are swollen. His nose is red. And he says, "I can't see you anymore. I'm not going to let you hurt me like this again." And his personal trainer says, "It was one sit-up. I just made you do one sit-up." I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where there's been someone asking you to go beyond where you want to go, to take you out of your comfort zone, to stretch you a little bit. And if that's true in our physical life, trying to get ourselves physically fit or whatever, it's true in our spiritual growth as well. Sometimes it might be the circumstances of the season, such as the one we're in at the moment, many of us taken out of our comfort zone. But God is able to use even some of those painful moments to help us to grow. He can bring us moments of grace. But sometimes God is actually a bit like the personal trainer himself. He asks us, encourages us, commands us to go out of our comfort zone, because he wants to give us an opportunity for growth, a pivotal moment in our lives. Last week, for our first reading, we heard of a pivotal moment in the life of Samuel, the prophet. It wasn't until he was able to say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening," that his life changed dramatically and for the better. And this week I want to focus on our first reading, a pivotal moment in the life of the prophet Jonah. Because Jonah, you see, is quite a hard-hearted and judgmental character. And God wanted Jonah's heart to grow. God wanted Jonah's heart to become more like his own heart, a heart full of mercy and compassion. So God decides to take Jonah way out of his comfort zone. And of course, what happens? Jonah didn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do that sit-up that God's asking him to do. So he runs away. If Nineveh is that way, Jonah goes that way. And he runs away as far as he can until he gets to the sea. And he can't run any further. So he gets in a boat, and the boat takes him out into the sea. But of course, what happens there is God appoints a storm. You can't outrun God. God appoints a storm. The sailors are getting frightened. Jonah's fast asleep. And eventually, to cut a long story short, they throw him overboard. Still, Jonah thinks he's getting away from God. But even then, God appoints. He's kind of got this job description for this animal he's looking for, and a big fish or a whale is the one that fits the job criteria. So God appoints this big fish or sea monster to swallow Jonah up. And in a sense, that's a huge metaphor or symbol of what can happen when we try and resist God's will, when we try and run away from what God's asking of us. We can end up in some pretty dark and messy places. So Jonah turns to prayer in the belly of the fish, finally. And isn't that typical for many of us? As the last resort, we'll turn to God and ask for his help. But it's a turning point. He makes a beautiful prayer. You can find it in the second chapter of the book of Jonah. In fact, Jonah's only 4 chapters long. It takes you about 15 minutes to read. So I really recommend you trying to read that this week. Take some time, 15 minutes, and just read your way through it. But he makes this beautiful prayer. And so God then gets the whale, the big fish, the sea monster, and throws him up, vomits him back onto the shore. God is giving Jonah a second chance to grow. And this is good news, because just as with Jonah, God is going to give you a second chance, other moments to grow your character, even if you don't take the first, or in fact the second, or the third, or the fourth, or the fifth, or whatever. And in many ways, Jonah is a story of second chances. God gave Jonah a second chance to grow, and God wants Jonah to do the same for others. "Up," he said, "go to Nineveh, the great city, and preach to them as I told you." Now, Nineveh is in the outskirts of what is currently modern-day Mosul in Iraq. The Assyrians were kind of warlike creature. They were the enemies of Israel. So, unsurprisingly, Jonah doesn't really want to go there, and he doesn't want to preach this message. He doesn't want to help them out, and he doesn't really like them very much. Nineveh was also a city of legendary wickedness and debauchery. Some of you might have come across something called Jonah Man Jazz. I came across it when I was at secondary school, and there's a line in there. Nineveh city was a city of sin. The jazzing and the jiving make a terrible din. So it was on its way at that moment, foot fast on the accelerator towards self-destruction. But God wanted Jonah to go there and to preach to the Ninevites so that they could hear his word, to give them the opportunity for growth and change. So Jonah goes there in obedience to the word of the Lord. And what happens? Rather than throwing things at Jonah or kicking him out or whatever it is, they actually listen. And as well as listening, they actually take that opportunity. Perhaps they were ready to hear that message, that challenge from God, and they change their ways. News reaches the king, and they proclaim a fast. He proclaims a fast from the greatest, himself, the king, to the least. One of the comical elements, and in fact there's loads of humour in the book of Jonah, one of the comical elements is that even the animals are wearing sackcloth and ashes. They hear this difficult message that Jonah brings from God, and they take it. In our gospel today, we have Peter and Andrew. We have their pivotal moments, or one of their pivotal moments. They're just doing their jobs, their everyday stuff, when Jesus comes along and calls them to leave everything and follow him. He's going to take them, they might not know it at this stage, but he's going to take them way, way out of their comfort zone. We know what happened to Peter at the end of his life, crucified upside down on the cross, and many of those ups and downs on his journey and his relationship with Jesus on the way. But that for them is a moment of decision, an opportunity for growth, a pivotal moment that changes everything, and they take it. So what about us? What about me? What about you? What about those pivotal moments that God is offering to us? Do we rise to the occasion? Do we grow? Or do we resist growth and change and just stay the same, or at least fool ourselves that we're staying the same? Because God can use these pivotal moments to point to the areas of growth that we need. In Jonah's case, he needed to learn the Lord's mercy. He needed to experience that for himself, and he needed to become merciful like God. Maybe that's the same for us. Maybe there are other values, other qualities that God needs us to learn, where we need to grow. Jonah didn't want to acknowledge the pain, so he tried running away from growth. But running away from growth is never going to produce happiness or satisfaction. Because if you live life just to be comfortable, you're never going to be satisfied with life, because that's not the life that God is shaping you for. So how do we prepare? How do you prepare to make the most of those opportunities that God gives us, those pivotal moments, those moments of grace, those moments for growth? Well, firstly, ignore that initial response to run or to protest against the sit-up and refuse to do it, or to become the ostrich that buries its head in the sand. Stay with the moment instead. Secondly, ask God, the personal trainer, ask God what he wants you to do. The Ninevites did what was required of them, and that changed everything for them. And then thirdly, give someone you know permission to challenge you about the moment or in the moment. Someone who isn't your parent, who isn't your spouse, someone who is wise and insightful, someone who cares about you, who loves you, and then receive their challenge with the honesty and the humility that the Ninevites demonstrated. You know, God cares more about your character than he cares about your comfort. He wants you to grow. So maybe the question with which to leave you today, what are those sit-ups that God's calling you to do right here at this moment in your life?